Hello everyone, welcome back. As I mentioned in my previous video, the effect hook is a commonly used hook in the functional components, right? So, as a developer, we must thoroughly understand this hook. In addition to the component did mount and component did update, the effect hook can handle the component will unmount lifecycle method as well. In our previous video, we learned about the effect hook, which doesn't involve any cleanup actions. Alright? By the way, in this video, we will go over how to clean up the effect in detail. The cleanup actions are not required in most cases. But if your effect is dealing with subscriptions for any external data source, then you may require to use this cleanup method. So in this video, we will go over two examples of cleanup actions using component will unmount and component did update. Let us move back to Visual Studio Code. Here we are using the existing repository. You can find the link in the video description. Let me create a new folder called useEffect cleanup. Within that folder, we will create three components: cleanup component, then component A and component B. Here, the cleanup component is a parent component that holds component A and component B. Okay. In the cleanup.js, we will start by importing React and useState from React. Then, we will define the component and export it. At the same time, we will start the application. Then, in the return statement, we will add the paragraph tag for the information. Okay. Below that paragraph tag, we will include the button tag that toggles the component between showing and hiding, which helps us to cover the cleanup actions in component will unmount, right? Then, to handle this toggle functionality, we will define the state variables. We will set the toggle state to true, which enables the component on initial page load, right? Whenever we click the button, we have to update the toggle state. So to handle that, we will use set toggle with not of toggle, which toggles the state between true and false, correct? In component A, we will start by importing React and useEffect from React. Then let's define the component and export it. Okay. And in the return statement, we will define the templates. As usual, we will define one paragraph tag and a horizontal line. Fine. Now we are in place to define the effect hook, right? As I already said in my previous video, the effect hook accepts the callback method and the dependency array. So inside the callback method, whatever we are including as a statement, it will execute as part of effect. Along with that, we can able to pass one more method inside the callback method, that is cleanup method. Okay. But here, whenever we are passing any method, we have to use a return statement before that method. It can be an arrow function or a named function. So the statements inside this method cleans up the effect. Okay. I know this is one of the confusing topics. Just concentrate on the video for next 5 minutes and I make sure you will understand this topic. Fine. Let's think about the stock market application, which updates the stock's price more frequently, right? Let's say for every 2 seconds they update their price. This could not be a typical use case, but just imagine these things in mind, okay? So once this component renders in the browser, it will fetch the data for every 2 seconds because we had given an empty array as the second argument in the effect hook, right? Here we are not going to implement any API call to get the data from the server. Okay, if we do so, the video length might get increased and we may tend to go out of this topic also. So instead of handling an API call, we will return a console statement for every 2 seconds. Then as an effect statement, we will add the set interval method, which accepts the callback method and the timer value. Here the timer is 2000. So for every 2 seconds, this callback method will execute the console statement. In that case, whenever the component renders in the browser, we can able to see the console statement for every 2 seconds. I am assuming this console statement is an API call to fetch the stock's price. Am I right? So the API call should not be there whenever the component is removed from the DOM or when it unmounts from the DOM, right? Now we are back in the cleanup component. We will import the component A from component A. Then below the button element, we will include this component A, that is based on the toggle property, right? If the toggle is equal to true, then the component A gets mounted in the DOM. Otherwise, it will be unmounted from the DOM, right? Finally, we will comment out the counter component and include the cleanup component in app.js. Let's save the changes and head back to the browser. In the browser window, we can able to see the templates defined in the components, right? Let me open the developer tools to the right side. We will clear the console statements and refresh the page. We can able to see the console statement for every 2 seconds, right? I mean, we are invoking the API call for every 2 seconds. Now, if I hide this component, that is, if I unmount this component from the DOM, then we should not see this console statement, right? Fine. Let's hide the component. If I unmount the component, still we can able to see the log statement. So what's happening here? Actually, we have attached an timer in the effect hook, right? But it was not cleared on component unmount. Am I correct? That's the reason we are saying this console statement. Let me toggle the component multiple times. Now the console statements are executing very much faster when compared with previous one, right? It is not at all maintaining the time interval, that is 2 seconds, right? So every time whenever the component mounts in the browser, the effect hook attaches the new time interval. For example, if the component mounted for 10 times, then there are 10 timers get attached to the component. That's the reason the console statements are logging very faster. If you consider these logs as API calls, then there would be too many unnecessary API calls. Am I right? Let's get back to Visual Studio Code and fix this problem. In the effect hook, we will assign the set interval method to the timer id variable. Okay. Before that, we will add one more console statement which will help us to know about the execution of effect and the cleanup. Then in the cleanup method, we will clear the timer id using clear interval method. Now we will save the changes and head back to the browser. As you can see in the browser, if I refresh the page, we can able to see the console statements that are effect goes here text and followed with the timer console, right? This means the effect was initiated. Let's unmount this component. If we do so, we can able to see the console statement for cleanup, and we could not see the console statement inside the timer, right? Which means the timers are cleared, so that we could not see the statements. Even if I toggle the component multiple times, I could see that the timer is executing for every 2 seconds. And whenever we unmount the component, the timer is getting cancelled, right? So if you want to clean up the effect, then you should pass the function with a return statement. This functionality is very much similar to component will unmount lifecycle method in class components. Earlier, in class component, if we want to clear the subscription to the external data source or any timers, then we have been used this component will unmount lifecycle method, right? The same way, if we want to clear the subscription feed or the timers in functional components, then we can use this functionality. Let us cover the same example with another component so that you will be very clear. This time we don't unmount the component, instead we will clean up the effect on the state update. Okay, let us navigate to component B. As I already said, just consider we are going to fire an API call to fetch the stock price for every 2 seconds. Okay, that is based on the state update. Let's import React, use state and use effect from React. Then we will define the component with state variables and export the component. In the return statement, we will include one paragraph tag and one button element, which updates the state variable on the element's click event. Okay, followed with this pan element, which could help us to know the number of times the button was clicked. Then we will define the effect hook. This effect hook will execute based on the count variable state changes. We'll add the console statement for the effect execution and cleanup execution. Then in the cleanup component, we will import this component B and add it over the return statements in the templates. Let's save the changes and head back to the browser. As you can see in the browser, fine. To avoid unnecessary confusion, let's comment out the component A from cleanup component. Now if you head back to the browser, we know the effect hook will execute right after the component's initial render method, right? Because of that, we can able to see the console statement. If I update the count, then again we can able to see the console statement, but this time we are seeing along with the cleanup statement. If I again update the count, then we can able to see the console statements. That is, before the effect execution statement, we could see the cleanup statement, right? So only for the first time we could not see the cleanup statement. Then from the second time, that is after the component's state update, we can able to see the cleanup statement followed with the effect execution statement, right? Here I have one question for you. We know that the component will re-render on state update. So in this case, when will this cleanup code will execute? Before or after the component re-render? If you already know the answer, please leave it in the comment section. Back in the VS Code, let me add the condition in the effect. After that, whenever the state changes, we will update the console statement for every 2 seconds. We'll save the changes and return to the browser. As you can see in the browser, we will update the count state. If we do so, we will be able to see the console statement, right? If we update the count state multiple times, we may see too many console statements. However, even if we update the state variable 100 times, the console statement for the timer should follow a time period of 2 seconds, right? I hope you got my point. Let's fix this problem like we did in the component A. Back in the VS Code, declare the timer ID variable, then assign the time interval to the timer ID variable in the if condition. And in the cleanup block, simply use the clear interval method to clear this timer. Let's save our changes and return to the browser. As you can see in the browser, the console statement in the timer is now working as expected, right? So whenever we use the subscription to any external data source or any timers, we should clear the effects in the state update in this manner, okay? Right. You should now have a good idea of what a cleanup is in the effect hook. This concludes the discussion of the effect hook and its implementation. Here, some of you may be wondering how this cleanup execution is going, right? When I was reading through this topic, I was actually very curious about this. So, let's take a closer look at how this works. How many of you are very familiar with self-executing function in JavaScript? Okay, we know that the end parenthesis in the self-executing function is in charge to invoke the self-executing function, right? So, internally, React.js converts the callback method to a self-invoking function, right? Which means whenever we pass the callback method to the effect hook, that will be converted to the self-invoking function and it will be assigned to a new variable without end parenthesis. Consider this to be a function we are passing as a callback in the effect hook. So, when the component is rendered in the browser, React.js internally assigns this callback method to the new variable along with the end parenthesis. So, in this case, we could see the effect execution from the callback method, right? Then, if there are any changes in the state variable, React will use this condition to see if the effect has any cleanup functionality. Since we had given the return statement before the cleanup method, this condition meets the expectation and execute the method. And finally, React will re-render the component. For any changes, this cycle is repeated indefinitely, okay? So, the effect hook will execute the effect statements after the component's initial render method, right? Then, for every state update, the effect hook will execute the cleanup statements if there are any. Right after the execution of cleanup statements, React will re-render the component. Then, once the component re-renders in the browser, the effect hook will execute the effect statements again, and so on, right? The answer is that the cleanup code flow will run before the component re-renders in the browser. We could basically cover three lifecycle methods using this effect hook. They are component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount. As I previously stated, this is one of the confusing topic. So, if you do not understand, don't worry. Wait until you encounter this problem in your real-time application, okay? I hope you enjoy the video. If you completely understand this topic or if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section along with your observations. This may help other people. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you again in the next video.